and welcome to Meet the Candidates. I'm Jim Verzino, your host. I'm here today with Mike Mrowicki. Hello, Mike. How you doing today?
I'm doing well. Thanks for having me here.
Of course. Why don't you start us out by telling us what you're running for, exactly what we're here to discuss?
Sure. Well, first of all, I'd like to thank you and the people here at BCTV for putting this out there and allowing candidates to be heard by the people out there who might not be able to get out and about that much. It's one of the great things BCTV does. I'm running for the Windham 4 House of Representatives seat in the Vermont State House. I've served 6 terms there, and I've been on the House Human Services Committee, which is an offshoot of the work I do in the community here, working with kids and families.
So you mentioned 6 terms.
That's right.
What would you say, so first start me with, you said Windham 4. Tell me what that is.
That's right. Putney, Dummerston, Westminster.
Okay, cool,
Yeah.
cool. And what would you say are your passion issues? What are the things that, I don't want to say you really care about, because we all care about everything, but sort of what are your big issues? You mentioned you're on the Human Services Committee. Why don't you tell us about what your major issues are?
Sure. The concerns that I hear from the people I'm talking about have to do a lot with environmental concerns. Climate change is a huge concern, and here in Vermont it feels that much more closer to the bone since we can see the changes already. 30 years ago, farmers are telling me you could expect a frost probably mid-September to the end of the month, and now that's been moved back a month. What we can do right here in Vermont is as we're doing in Windham County, we're the fastest growing alternative energy and solar markets in the state. We can do that with efficiency, we can do that with alternatives. It's important, though, that we have that consciousness that says it's important for all of us to do this. The other things that I'm hearing about, for the most part, people are continually disappointed and sometimes outraged with what they're seeing coming out of Washington right now, specifically the White House. We have a great delegation, and we're proud to have Senator Leahy and Sanders and Welch up there, and they're doing great work for us. But you never know what's going to come out of the White House and how it's affecting us down here, right on the ground. For example, Planned Parenthood. I support family planning. I support the role family planning pays in keeping our people healthy, with keeping our economy growing. Family planning is a part of many of us understanding that we want to have the family we want when we want it. The challenges that are being put out there, right down to trying to ban contraceptives now that they're talking about, and the cuts in funding to Planned Parenthood are important for people all across the board. And it's important that people know we're going to stand up for them. We're going to push back against the Trump administration. If he cuts Planned Parenthood funding, we're going to backfill it. Likewise with the environmental rollbacks from the Trump administration. We're going to push back. We're going to take what the EPA put into place that they're trying to pull back and put that into state statutes. The other piece that has been really important to the people I work for has been to have common sense gun reforms. We want to have a safer place. We want people to know that their legislators are listening to them on this concern, and we're going to do something about it. We passed the start of some vital legislation that reflects the reality of the 21st century. We're not trying to take people's guns away. We just want to make sure that they don't get into the wrong hands. And specifically, that means convicted violent felons and domestic abusers. That's who should be afraid of the laws we passed. And moving forward, I'd like to see us look into waiting periods for gun purchases. It's important that the people who are contacting me, the parents whose kids are afraid to go to school because of what they see in the news, the parents who are afraid to send their kids to school by what they're hearing in the news, know we hear them, we're acting on those concerns, and we're going to make sure that schools are safe, that our communities are safe.
So tell me again what committee you serve?
Human Services.
Human Services.
That's right.
So is that the committee that deals with gun laws? Or where does that sort of fit in? Because you mentioned the environment, you mentioned Planned Parenthood and family planning. So a lot of us, me, but I think a lot of the public, doesn't really understand exactly how the House works. So one of the things I like to sort of tease out here is if you're on Human Services, what's covered, and if you've got a passion issue, that's not in your committee? How does that get handled? So can you just clue us in on sort of what does Human Services actually do?
Sure. We oversee the Agency of Human Services, which encompasses everything from child care, corrections, health care, elder care, disabilities. It's the largest agency in state government, and it's the one that helps create the quality of life that we enjoy here in Vermont. It especially gives us an opportunity to bring a voice for those who don't have a voice, whether it's children, the disabled, the elders of Vermont. Children in this state have challenges enough in some situations, especially the children that grow up in generational poverty. And one of the things that I was able to help, because I work in human services outside the legislature, in my real job, as my paying job, as we say, I've seen how the effects of childhood trauma affect children right up through. And most of the areas that I just mentioned, where we have difficulties, you can look back at a root cause being childhood trauma. About 14% now of Vermonters, for total population, have a high score of childhood trauma. And childhood trauma doesn't go away. And it manifests later in the need for special education, often results in drug and alcohol abuse, incarceration, and chronic health care problems. Sure. We've seen a 1998 Kaiser Permanente in the CDC commissioned the first study for what people in the field understood already, but this gives, puts the facts and figures to what people were seeing. What we know now is there are direct correlations between chronic health care problems, corrections populations, special ed. So what we did 2 years ago, starting in the Human Services Committee, we passed a bill that says it's time for the society as a whole to look at the challenges that childhood trauma bring about. And we passed a bill that started the process that moved next to a study committee. That helps more legislators understand the problem and the results of this problem. And then we put a bill on the floor to put in place some of the things we think need to happen to raise, first of all, to raise the awareness about the prevalence and the effects, and then systemic changes. And I feel good that it was a bill I helped shepherd through the House, and with a lot of education and working the relationships that I've built over the years, we were able to get that bill passed by 138-0.
Wow.
I think we showed that we can work in a tripartisan manner in the State House, and especially when our children are on the line, we can come together and do what's best for Vermont.
So why the term, I have so many questions, but why the term tripartisan rather than bipartisan?
We have three major parties in Vermont. There's the Democrats, Republicans, and Progressives.
Okay,
Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah. And there's actually, in the House, there's also enough of an independent presence, people who don't register with a party but are independents. There's 7 of those now. 7, at least in the last session, 7 independents, 7 progressives, 82 Democrats, and I think there were 53 Republicans.
Okay, it's a very large House relative to the population.
It is. It's not as big as New Hampshire's, and it's not as big as it used to be. The House used to have 1 member for each town in Vermont. So there were 260 members.
Oh my goodness.
But going back to our own Senator Gannett here, he helped people understand that's not representative democracy. When Brattleboro has as many votes as Windham,
Right.
Which only has a couple hundred people, so they changed it so that now each representative represents about 4,000 people. I'm in a dual district, a 2-member district, so we represent about 8,000 people.
Do you have a competitor in this race when you say it's a dual district?
That's right.
So how?
It's a 2-member district.
Okay.
I had been serving since I'd been in the legislature with David Dean, who just retired.
Okay.
We just had a primary, and I have a new working mate to take up to Montpelier, and that's Nader Hashim. Nader lives in Dummerston. He's been working also with the Vermont State Police, and he's going to bring his ideas around racial, social justice, implicit bias, and how Vermont has some great opportunities coming up to recognize, again, this is what the 21st century looks like. If you look at the schools around Vermont, even in Brattleboro here, our school populations are now about 15% people of color. It's not like the world population, where the reality is only 7% of the world population is white. America is starting to look a lot like the rest of the world. There are states like Florida, Texas, California that are moving to be majority-minority, where the minority populations will be the majority of voters. Vermont's not there yet, but we're starting to move in that direction, and it's time for many of us to help understand. And Nader has a background, I think, that'll be helpful for that.
Mm-hmm. So are you and Nader both running unopposed for 2 seats?
That's
Is that
right.
how you're able to say you're bringing Nader and there hasn't been a
That's right.
full election yet?
We were in the primary. There are no Republican or other opponents for that race right now. So
Okay.
we're pretty assured to be in Montpelier come January.
Okay, cool. If you could, you've been up in Montpelier for a long time. What is the one? Actually, I'm going to ask the one thing, but I'm going to ask it in 2 ways. What is the one thing first that you wish would have passed? Like something that you worked on that you're just like, that one really hurt. That one not getting by, that one really hurt.
Sure.
And then when you're done with that, let's talk about the one thing that did get passed, that you worked hard on, that you're really proud of, sort of what happened. So let's start with the one that didn't happen.
Sure. One of the concerns many of us have is the Trump economy is becoming even more stratified. The upper 1% is where most of the wealth is going to, and the rest of us are really scrambling for crumbs. We're trying to create an economy that works for all, not just the select few. And to that end, we passed several bills last year, raising the minimum wage, paid family leave. These are things that people are asking for. What we're finding out is we're having a hard time keeping young people here, and they come and they say you can't live on what you can make at entry-level jobs here. We passed those, and the governor vetoed them. I think it's something we need to look at in the bigger picture, again, to make an economy that works for all of us.
And how does it work in Vermont? Can there be a voted override of a governor?
There can.
Veto?
Yep.
Sorry to get into this much
No, not at
detail
all.
of the.
Several years ago, there were 2 vetoes that were overwritten by Governor Douglas. One was a budget; he vetoed the budget, and the other was marriage equality. And marriage equality, you need 2/3 of a vote to override, which will be 100 votes, and we overrode that by 1 vote.
Okay. Wow.
So that there certainly is the possibility. We didn't have the votes this time, but what we're hoping in this election is we can push back to that level where it'll level the playing field with dealing with the governor.
Okay.
Yeah.
So the one that hurt most is this minimum wage, and something there were a couple other things in that bill as well.
Paid family leave.
And paid family leave.
Pretty important thing that we feel if people are sick, they shouldn't have to choose between, or if they have a child sick, if they're taking care of an elderly parent, if they're sick, they shouldn't have to choose between work.
Right.
We're one of the few countries in the world that doesn't do this. It sounds like if we're really trying to support families, this is something that we need to do.
Okay.
Sure.
And what's one that you feel really proud of, that you worked for it,
Sure.
you sort of called in chits or whatever you have to do, and this one actually got through? This could be any time in your career. It doesn't have to be in the last session.
I mean, initially I would say the childhood trauma bill that we worked for several years to put through. My first year in the legislature, though, I was asked to shepherd through a bill which would protect children from lead paint in the environment. It's a pretty tough thing for kids to be exposed to that because it damages the brain. and it's irreparable. So children who have high lead levels in their blood will show up. It may have something to do with the level of special education we need in Vermont, because we have a lot of old housing stock. We need to make sure that's being taken care of, and most landlords are pretty good to do the required practices they need. Who could be against protecting our children from lead in the environment? Well, I found out because...
I was going to say, probably a lot of people.
Well, not really. Most people were for it, but we came up, and it was the gun lobby who came and said, we're going to kill this bill if you don't make sure you put protections in there, because we feel this is a backdoor attempt to prevent us from making our own bullets.
Wow.
That's what I said. So we had to sit down with them. You know, it was a good exercise for me to understand that some people put things out there that I don't agree with, but you have to sit down with them and work with them, and we were able to convince them this had nothing to do with their ability to make bullets. So we got to the point where we got the bill passed. So it was a good exercise, an educational moment for me to understand how the legislature can work.
So when they say, when you said the gun lobby came to you and said,
That's
we'll
right.
kill this bill,
Yeah.
I mean, the gun lobby may be able to influence legislators, but they aren't legislators. How can they kill a bill here in Vermont that has nothing to do with guns?
Sure.
How does that how does that actually work?
Well, at the time, this was 12 years ago, they had a lot more influence.
Okay.
We just passed 2 bills, but there are a lot of people who were scared that they would run somebody against them, and the reality is they can raise a lot of money like that. 2 years ago, David Dean and I were challenged by 2 of the officers from the gun owners of Vermont, and they raised substantially more money than we did. It didn't help them because I think they only got about 20% of the vote in our district. So I think their influence is waning, and I think people are looking at what makes common sense in this area. The gun bills that we put forward are common sense reforms. They're not looking to take guns away from people. They want to keep guns out of the hands of the wrong people. And when it comes to waiting periods, basically, that helps in 2 areas. It helps reduce suicide rates, and it helps domestic violence. So we're going to keep pushing for things like that, but you know that we'll probably get some pushback from the people who participate in the various organizations that make up the gun lobby, and we'll have those discussions and see where we go.
Cool. So lead paint, that's cool.
You didn't
That's
know
great.
that? Yeah.
Well, I did know that. I actually used to teach the classes on how to appropriately scrape
The
paint.
required practices.
Yes,
Yeah.
the RRP it was called.
Yeah. What you didn't know probably was the backstory.
No, I didn't. And when I got into it, it was at the federal level.
Yeah, yeah.
So I don't know if it's HUD or I don't remember exactly how it
That's
worked.
where the criteria come, and it's a difficult situation in Vermont because we do have a lot of old housing stock.
We have a lot of old housing stock, and much of it doesn't appreciate.
Yep.
So
Yeah,
doing work
don't.
on old housing stock is
yeah,
a big difficult
Yeah.
thing here. It's one of the, as a matter of fact, it's sort of brings me to a good question about, I don't know if the question's good. Viewers will decide that, I guess. But one of the problems we have here, particularly in Brattleboro, but I think throughout Windham County, is we have a really poor housing stock. And I know a big part of that is houses don't really appreciate in the same way that they do in other parts of the country. And therefore, we can't borrow against the value of the house to actually do these big projects, such as appropriately repaint an old house on its exterior or interior or other repairs.
Yep.
And is there anything that can be done at a legislative level about really the housing stock?
yeah. Well, in terms of repairs, there are some services already out there. The Windham Windsor Housing Trust oversees some funds that come through both federal and state agencies that can help with remediations for this kind of situation or just general repairs. What you point out is one of the dilemmas that homeowners find, and renters as well, that the housing stock is older and it doesn't appreciate enough sometimes to keep up with it. So I think one of the things we can do, and we started last session, is to continue to expand the housing market out here. We budgeted $35 million in housing bonds and parceled that out to groups like the Windham Windsor Housing Trust, and they leveraged that into $100 million. What that's helping to do is to refurbish older houses and then put some new houses, new housing. I'm on the Affordable Housing Committee in Putney, and for years we've been trying to get some projects going with the Housing Trust, and they've done some wonderful work. And we just had an opening at the Putney Landing where they brought 20 new units online. Along with the second part of the project was to refurbish the Noise House, which is a communal situation, small apartments and some single room apartments. So it helped to bring more housing into Putney, and
Right.
As you probably know, the Brattleboro has a very low vacancy rate in here, so it's tough to find housing, and until we continue to expand that,
Right.
and I think that's where government does play a part, where we have to step in where the market's not going to do that.
Right. Where I know I've spoken to other people that have this problem, and Windham Windsor Housing Trust does some amazing work.
Yeah.
And the result has been some beautiful rehabs of some beautiful places that now people that couldn't afford good homes now can have them.
Yeah.
But the flip side of that is we now have very little market rate decent housing. So you get above, I don't know, it depends on the size of your family, anywhere from $35,000 to $45,000 a year, and now there's really no good housing stock until you're making $75,000 or $80,000 a year.
Yeah.
And you can, and even then, I actually know of people that are relatively well paid that have decided not to live in Brattleboro and move to Keene and commute here because they can't find good housing.
Yeah.
And this is a huge problem.
Yeah.
So I'm appreciative and like everything that Windham Windsor Housing Trust does, but it's still left this huge gap in the market where people can't rent it. People can't rent a good place, and if you're going to buy a place, you can't. Your cost just isn't in buying it. It's in a huge rehab of a 100-year-old house that most people can't afford.
Yeah, you make a good point. Vermont has the highest homeownership rate in the country, and that's a good thing. One of the challenges is, though, as you say, there's limited stock, and the market is not stepping in to fill that. There's some people who say free markets are the savior for all ills, and my concern is it's not always so, and this is a good example.
Right. This is a great example where the market isn't doing what sort of the textbooks say it should do. Right? If there's low housing, or if there's high demand and low supply, theoretically, the market should fix that with some higher housing values, and yet they don't exist. Higher rents are happening, right? But not higher home values.
And that's where I think government has a role.
Right.
Government should step in and fill that hole that's there. It's become a barrier to people being able to hire people. There are businesses going begging right now for good employees. And I think that housing shortage is a barrier to that, and something we need to continue to look at and work on. And I know Senator Ballant, who works on the Economic Services, Economic Development Committee, is well aware of that, and they're trying to put that to a higher level of priority.
Cool. All right, so we are just about out of time. Is there anything else sort of about your record or anything else that you'd like to communicate to the viewers?
Sure. Well, I appreciate the chance to be here. I appreciate the chance to serve the people of this district. My perspective on representative democracy that we have here in this nation and in this state is that my job is to be your voice. Whether it's you want a bill passed, whether you need help with getting your health care coverage to work, that's the role of representative here, and that's why I'm working to be the voice for you, the voters out there. I'm looking to help build a Vermont that works for all of us, You know, we have an economy that's strong, but it still doesn't work for all Vermonters. We want it to work for all Vermonters, not just a select few. We want a Vermont that recognizes that justice is conveyed also in the environment, in our economy, in racial and social justice. We want to be kind to the environment, so that's the future of our state. I think Vermont can be a leader, as it has in many areas, and we need to be a leader in environmental justice, economic justice, and racial and social justice. And I think as we go ahead, that's where we want to take Vermont. And Vermont's a great place. I love Vermont. It's why I live here. It's why I've raised a family here. And I want it to be a great place to live, work, raise a family, and retire with security. It's important that Vermont can be that for all people, and that's the kind of things that I'll be working for to be your voice in Montpelier.
Cool. And if people want to learn more about you, do you have a website, a Facebook page? What are those?
Sure. Website is windham4.net. And
spelled out or the number 4?
Windham with the numeral 4.net.
Okay.
And then I'm on Facebook too. If you just look for Mike Mrowicki, you'll find me on Facebook as well.
Cool. All right. Thanks, Mike.
Thanks a lot. And thanks again for your work here.
My pleasure.